Last week, while preparing for this event, I typed into ChatGPT and asked it to produce an editorial. And much to my chagrin, it produced a pretty good one. And while of course I used ChatGPT as a means to an end of getting good at this event, perhaps it was symbolic of something different, a dramatic change in our media landscape. And that's what's exactly discussed in today's editorial, entitled The Long Slow Death of the Newspaper Editorial by Paul Farhi. In today's editorial, they argue that we've seen a dramatic shift in our media landscape, one away from editorials towards increased polarization and less attention to social issues. So today, I'm going to understand and interpret today's article by first understanding what they do well, then by considering what they could work on, and third and finally, by looking at the implications of the article's discussion. So first, let's talk about this editorial and what they are doing well. This comes in two primary ways. First, by discussing the importance to social change, and second, by looking at polarization. This editorial does an incredible job talking about the importance of editorials to social change. They explain that editorials have gone all the way back to the colonial era, where we have used it to discuss and change and encourage people to find something in common. They explained that editorials are unique because they often encourage general, regular citizens to write them, not necessarily reporters or journalists who are experts in this field. But the second thing that this editorial does well is they do a great job discussing the impact, which is of course increased polarization. This is important because in a digital media landscape, we see more nationalization of politics, where everything is at our fingertips, whether it be on social media or even in our news apps. That editorial does a great job discussing both of those topics. However, it's not perfect in every regard, which leads me to ways that this editorial could actually improve upon itself. First is that the editorial needs to work on and actually call out the companies who are doing this. The reality and one of the reasons why editorials have seen a dramatic decline is because they're just not profitable. Companies like the New York Times and Washington Post have instead opted for more breaking news, something that makes real money, instead of opting for more local news, like editorials, which are still just as, if not more important. The editorial should have called this out, but instead they didn't, and they more so just focused on the decline, instead of looking at the real root of that cause. But second, they also fail to account for the digital age. Not once in this editorial does it actually mention that digitization of media has also resulted in this decline. In order to improve this editorial, it would have been critical for them to discuss the way that the digital age has transformed our understanding and the way that we read media, because we're no longer just reading it out of a newspaper that's delivered to our doorstep, but also on listening to it on podcasts, seeing it on social media, and reading it on our news apps. However, with an understanding of what this editorial does well and also what they could work on, let's consider some of the broader implications of the themes discussed in today's editorial. There are two primary implications to the death of editorials. First is civic engagement, and second is nationalization. First, let's talk about civic engagement. Civic engagement is, of course, incredibly important. It encourages people to vote and get involved, go to their school board meetings, all sorts of fun stuff like that. But the unfortunate reality is that editorials have been a huge influencer of this. And now we're taking that out of the hands of the people and instead leaving that to major news producers like The Guardian or the New York Times, instead of favoring more local journalism. On top of this, this encourages people to instead not look necessarily at what's in their communities around them, but more so bigger. This leads me though to my second impact, which is nationalization. The editorial does touch on it, but it's important. When we see a decline in local journalism, when citizens no longer feel comfortable expressing their opinions in editorials, and importantly, when big news companies refuse to publish those editorials, we see more nationalized politics. Right now, if you were to open up your phone and look at your news, you would see breaking news. Tons of top headlines about major things that Donald Trump has done or wars abroad. What you wouldn't see is local news, local editorials from your neighbors or your friends and family. This is important because it's led us to believe that everything happens at the top, in Washington, when in reality, most of the biggest social change that we can bring is in fact in our local communities, our cities, our counties, our states, and our school boards. This is, of course, a negative impact that has resulted directly from a lack of discussion due to a decrease in our editorials. So today, I read the editorial, The Long Slow Death of the Newspaper Editorial by Paul Farhi. We understood that in this editorial, they first we understood in this editorial, they discussed the depth of the editorial. First, we looked at what they do well. Then we considered how they could improve by talking about the root of this problem. And third and finally, considered the implications, which were decreases in civic engagement and increases in national attention. At the end of the day, ChatGPT, like I explained, is symbolic of a dramatic change. And just like editorials, maybe we can eventually see a media change for the better.